we sing our trinkets.
Whosoever knows the folds and complexities of his own mother's body, he shall never die.
Strange obligation.
Whosoever knows the latitudes of his mother's body, whosoever has taken her into his arms and immersed her baptismally in the first floor tub, lifting one of her alabaster legs and then the other over its lip.
But now I'm in a rock band, duty free.
Whosoever bathes her with Woolworth soaps in sample sizes, whosoever twists the creaky taps and tests the water on the inside of his wrist, whosoever shovels a couple of tablespoons of rose bath salts under the billowing faucet and marvels at their vermilion color, whosoever bends by hand her sclerotic limbs as if reassuring himself about the condition of a hinge, whosoever has kissed his mother on the part that separates the lobes of her white hair and has cooed her name while soaping underneath the breast where he was once fed. Whosoever breathes the acrid and dispiriting stench of his mother's body while scrubbing the greater part of the smell away with Woolworth's lavender soaps, who has pushed her discarded bra and oversized lingerie to one side, away from the water sloshing occasionally over the edge of the tub and choking the runoff drain, who has lost his footing on these panties once dotted with blood of children unconceived, his siblings unconceived, panties now intended to fit over a vinyl undergarment. Whosoever will notice in the course of his mission the ripe light of early November as it's played out on the wall of the bathroom, where one of those plug-in electric candles with plastic base is the only source of illumination. Whosoever looks nonetheless at his Pacific mom's face in that water and knows in a new age kind of way the face he had before he was born. Whosoever weeps over his mother's condition while bathing her silently weeps, without words or expressions of pity or any nose blowing or honking while crying, just weeps for a second, like a ninny. Whosoever is thereafter recovered quickly and forcefully from despair, whosoever has formulated a simple gratitude for the fact that he still has a mother, whosoever has nonetheless wondered at the kind of astral justice that has immobilized her thus, he shall never die. So this is the roof. That's Lower Manhattan, Wall Street area. At one time it had an amazing view of the World Trade Center. Sort of, see where the cranes are straight across there is probably the cranes that are working on World Trade Center 7, which is being rehabbed since 9/11. So there was a really ominous and scary view of smoking buildings for a long time up there. And that's New York Harbor, Hoboken beyond, where I used to live for a long time. Statue of Liberty. So it's part of what Brooklyn is about, is being on the other side of Manhattan and always looking across the water at it in a way. And So part of that exile that I was talking about that's integral to thinking about New York is inherent in Brooklyn's not being Manhattan. You know, so it seems not coincidental to me that all these writers live over here now. They don't live over there, even though many of them are sort of writing about that experience and that Manhattan culture, you know. My family is big on sort of self-made people. That's its strong suit, you know. My father's father was a car dealer and not a terribly successful one, and then my dad kind of worked his way up and went to an Ivy League college and became pretty successful in business. And my mother's father, I think he was from a kind of rural agricultural family in Missouri and became a journalist and became very successful and ultimately became the publisher of the New York Daily News. So both sides have this kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, Horatio Alger, anyone can make it in America mentality. Hey.
Oh, wait.
All right, let's go to the library first.
Okay, what shall we talk about?
We're here in Park Slope, the literary epicenter of New York City. We'll be going down to 8th Avenue, sort of roughly in the direction of where Paul Auster lives, Jonathan Foer, and Donald Antrim, Colin Harrison. They all live here in the beautiful brownstones down here off of 8th Avenue. You know what you're gonna get to do with me right now, Marco? This incredible New York experience. You're gonna come with me as I go and see if my car has a parking ticket, which I think it does, because it's right there. So let's go take a look and see if my car has a parking ticket. The answer is yes. $45. I never won anything as a kid. I was always the loser in whatever competition was the competition. And, you know, at one point I was taking dancing classes in 8th grade, and in dancing class, periodically the guy who ran it would always give away money. And it seemed like it was just random. Like suddenly he would say, here's $1, and he'd give all these people $1. I never got any of the $1.
When was this built? Were any of those guys were around when?
I don't know for sure, but I know that there was this period when Brooklyn was really trying to compete with Manhattan in terms of architecture. And the Brooklyn Museum, which is just down the block, was meant to be, they wanted to be as great as the Metropolitan Museum, which it's not, but that was the idea. And the Brooklyn Public Library is meant to be, you know, on a scale as monumental a scale as the New York Public Library. I didn't have an agent at the time that I began sending stories out. I just sent them out myself. You know, in the manila envelope with the return envelope included. So it was just this relentless kind of tidal movement of stories coming out, rejection letters coming back. And I saved them all for a while. I saved every letter. So if there was even a scrap of encouragement at the bottom of the note, that was a big deal. Like the first time at the Paris Review, there were considered to be echelons of rejection. There was the form letter, then there was the form letter with a note at the bottom, then there was the handwritten note, and so forth. And when I first got the form letter, and at the bottom was scrawled the words, "We would be interested in seeing more of your work," it was like, hallelujah. Yeah.
So the fact that now all the artsy people, all the writers, the intellectuals, the musicians are in Brooklyn, does make Brooklyn feel better than Manhattan?
It would depend who you asked, of course, but I think there's ample reason to think that Brooklyn is sort of where it's happening right now. and probably a lot of people who live here really feel that way. Obviously, Manhattan will always have the affluence and always have, the great cultural institutions that it has, but right now Brooklyn has a really powerful kind of community spirit to it that's really charming. And that's sort of why I think it's important to come here, because everybody uses this library. It's not a research library like the 42nd Street Library. It's a community library where people really come and browse the shelves and take out books and stuff like that. My books are up in the fiction section. You can just walk right in there and take them off the shelf like anybody else's books, And there were periods when, I remember right before the ice storm came out, so this was about December of '93 maybe, being so badly in debt that I realized that I had $300 to my name. Like if I totaled up all the money I had in whatever spot in my apartment, in my bank accounts, $300, and rent due the next day of $400, So it just was a relentless struggle of where you're gonna get the next check and so forth. And luckily, it often happened that right when you were at death's door, suddenly, you would sell a story for $500 and then you'd have an extra $100, to last you for 60 days, And it was like that for a long time. Boys enter the house, boys enter the house. Boys, and with them the ideas of boys. Ideas leaden, reductive, inflexible, enter the house. Boys, two of them wound into hospital packaging. Boys with infant pattern baldness slung in the arms of parents. Boys dreaming of breasts enter the house. Twin boys, kettles on the boil, boys in hideous vinyl knapsacks that young couples from Edison, New Jersey wear on their shirt fronts, knapsacks coated with baby saliva and staphylococcus and milk vomit, enter the house.
The windmarks have had your voice once. It echoes and sings like you.
Two boys, one striking the other with a rubberized hot dog, enter the house. Two boys, one striking the other with a willow switch about the head and shoulders, the other crying, enter the house. Boys enter the house speaking nonsense. Boys enter the house calling for mother. On a Sunday in May, a day one might nearly describe as perfect, an ice cream truck comes slowly down the lane, chimes inducing salivation, and children run after it. Not long after which, boys dig a hole in the backyard and bury their younger sister's dolls 2 feet down, so that you will never find these dolls, and these dolls will rot in hell, after which boys enter the house.
Your memory, I know why. The desert burns with fever.
Boys trailing after their father like he's the second goddamned coming of Christ, goddamned almighty, enter the house, repair to the basement to watch baseball. Boys enter the house, site of devastation, and repair immediately to the kitchen. Later they smash 3 family heirlooms in a 2.5-hour stretch, whereupon they are sent to their bedroom until freed in each case 13 minutes after. Boys enter the house, starchy and pressed shirts and flannel pants that itch so bad, fresh from Sunday school instruction, blonde and brown locks respectively plastered down, but even so the number of cowlicks protruding at odd angles, disconsolate, humbled, uncertain if boyish things, such as shooting at the neighbor's dog with a pump-action BB gun and gagging the fat boy up the street with a bandana, are exempted from the commandment to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, and thy neighbor as thyself. I mean, I see family as a really potent theme for contemporary literature because it's so easy to project other things onto it. I mean, if you want to talk about politics, you want to talk about gender, you want to talk about philosophy, you want to talk about sexuality, all that stuff happens in the context of family, and it kind of gets articulated in that context. And it's something that most people have or understand, you know. Well, I played music with my sister and brother some. I don't think that I played with my parents that much, although my mother was really instrumental in my taking piano in the first place and interested in my development as a pianist and really irritated when I quit taking lessons. But yeah, it was more that it was just an area for conversation and enthusiastic assent and dissent among my family. Oh, what else did I do with my siblings? We did a lot of drugs. We drank a lot. We watched TV. We watched Star Trek every day and smoked pot and watched Star Trek, you know, what people did in the 70s.
This is like the Arc de Triomphe.
Exactly. Imitative of Arc de Triomphe. That's exactly what it is. And, you know, about the Civil War, or the triumph of the Union side in the Civil War. And then, so what happened is, initially, you would come in your horse and carriage on this road here, and this tarmac, you know, automobile road here didn't exist at all. So there was a very specific architectural effect that they imagined you would have, which you'll see when we get to it. Coming in through here in your carriage, you would go under an underpass and then see the whole panorama of the park open in front of you. It's a really beautiful park, and I do actually think that in some ways it's prettier than Central Park. Central Park was the dry run for Prospect Park. And because it's so beautiful, you know, we use it all the time, and everyone who moves to this neighborhood really, in part, moves here to have access to the park.
And you moved here in the early 90s?
Yeah, I came from New Jersey. I was in Hoboken. After I got out of graduate school, I moved to Hoboken, which was a kind of happening spot at that time. It was a really good music town. There were a lot of bands there and stuff, and it was a lot cheaper than Manhattan. But it started to get really kind of condo crazy and kind of yuppie-fied. So I moved out of there and came straight to Brooklyn, because that was sort of the beginning of when Brooklyn was really happening, when Park Slope was happening. First I was in Brooklyn Heights, which is really beautiful and old, and it's where Whitman lived. But then when I got my place on Fisher's Island, Amy got her place here, and so we stayed here after that.
come through here in your horse and carriage, and then it opens up to this big, gigantic meadow.
Wow.
I played soccer in here with these guys one time. They're always having pickup games. This is Ozzy's. It's the center of literary life in Park Slope. And every day, some writer in this neighborhood, and there are a whole lot of writers in this neighborhood, is coming in here for one thing or another. One of them is here. You know, virtually every time I come into Ozzy's to work, and I have to do it periodically when I get thrown out of the apartment by the Polish cleaning lady, there's potentially someone I know here working on something or other. And I'm sure there are writers in this room right now, even as I say these things. I don't like writing with other people around. It actually makes me uncomfortable. I don't even like writing with my wife in the room, you know. I like to be far away from other people. But sometimes it's unavoidable. And when it's unavoidable, this is where you come. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not lying awake thinking about the next time I'm gonna come to Ozzy's, but sometimes one needs to be here, and the coffee apparently is quite good, and the bagels are good, and so we come. I sort of take issue with the idea that you need to go out and observe. I kind of trust that observation happens while you're doing other things, and that you'll get plenty of experience just by your daily life. You don't need to create adventure. I'm not like Ernest Hemingway or George Plimpton, who goes out, you know, to fight in the Spanish Civil War so that I'll have something to write about. And so it may happen that one observes something fascinating at Ozzy's, but I don't think one sets out with that in mind. It just, you know, life is what happens while you're doing other things, essentially. And the same is true of observation.
So this is Astor Place.
Astor Place, the world famous.
Which used to be the center of Bohemia.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's without its connection to Bohemia, as you would find if we stood here for the next few minutes. But it's not quite the center it was, since Bohemia is less apparent here than 20 years ago, let's say.
You know, I never have met a habit as a writer that stuck. And so anytime I say, oh, I'm a guy who writes in the afternoon, I start writing in the morning, or I start writing at night. And anytime I say, oh, I have to be at this desk with these books around me, I start writing in bed, which is what I've been doing for the last 6 months, writing in bed. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I'm against rhyme or reason because I don't want the job to turn into a chore or an obligation. I want always to do it in a state of enthusiasm and excitement. So I like to wait until I really feel some kind of internal pressure to say something.
Alamo, sculpted by Tony Rosenthal, a great minimalist sculptor. And it was part of a campaign by the Lindsay administration in New York City in the early 60s to bring sculpture into public places. And it's one of the most successful examples of public sculpture in New York. I think it was put in 64 or 5, and actually I have the photo of it in this issue of the Paris Review. Because the interesting thing is that the people around the cube in the early 60s look pretty much like the people around the cube now.
I don't really have a place to write that's always the place, and I'm actually kind of superstitious about that, because then what happens if you're not there? I mean, so I feel like relying on locations is bad faith somehow. I mean, I have in my house on Fisher's Island a little room that's kind of like a library, studio, whatever you call it, but I actually don't work there. Now I work in bed, so if I'm, as long as there's a bed around right now, I can get some work done. But so the whole shelf-lined writer's office with the beautiful desk and the comfortable chair and the whatever ottoman, I mean, that stuff to me is great, but just doesn't relate to what I do exactly.
What is it made of?
Corten steel, which is a kind of steel that they use to make ships. Yeah, and there was a period when I think it was U.S. Steel that made it, was trying to kind of promote its public image a little bit, so they invited sculptors in to use the material to kind of get their name out. And it's sort of surprisingly lighter than you would think. We could turn it, but we don't want to hit this guy.
Do you need two people to turn it? Or
Yeah, you need a couple of people to turn it.
Can we try? I think one per team, right?
Well, all right, let's try. Maybe we want to go this way.
This way?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm walking by St. Mark's Church, where I've been for poetry readings lots of times. I wrote poetry when I was young. And here's the soba noodle shop, love that place. Here's the sushi restaurant with the really long lines. And over there across the street, that's the best bookstore in Lower Manhattan. You think I've never met anyone at the Cube? Everyone has. I met a woman there once, second date. She looked great. The light was perfect. I could almost tell you what the light looked like in her hair. It was prismatic. And I even had a job interview here once at the Cube. Why go into it? When the story starts to look back into you, the thing you see is your interpretation, rising up like the horizon line under the Verrazano Narrows. Your interpretation welcomes you, but it's dangerous too. Your interpretation feels dangerous. Is it going to be possible to tape record it, your story? Can it be fixed in the editing process? I'm crossing in front of Cooper Union now, as I have so many times, and I can see up ahead that there's some kind of disturbance going on at the Cube. I'm not sure what it is. The atmosphere feels, it's almost electrifying, really. There's a sense of possibility. There's a sense that the Cube is at the center of something. I'm beginning to trot, and I can see other people running around me now. I'm not sure that I can estimate exactly. We might have to wait for the official police estimate, but I'm guessing that the crowd is in the hundreds, and the crowd it's undulating. It's like a wartime crowd of some kind. I can see police and emergency personnel beginning to mass at the site, and if I can just part the crowd, excuse me, if I could just get by, yeah, thanks. Hi. Excuse me, I'm from a radio news magazine. Yeah, thanks. The police are driving in the water cannon. They're parking it just north of the site, and there's definitely some commotion now at the Cube. Excuse me, please. I see riot gear up ahead. I may have to stop talking. Just give me a moment here while I penetrate the crowd. Recording ends abruptly. To be an American writer is to be a second-class citizen, I think the writers in America that are valued by the culture at large are probably the writers of commercials and the writers of television miniseries and stuff like that. So I think I would rather be a European writer in a way, because in Europe, I think that the environment for literature is more, it's a more kind of reflective and warm environment for books than it is here. But to be an American writer is to have a lot of really good material at hand, I think, because there's so much contradiction and so much hypocrisy in American culture and government and politics that there's plenty to write about. There's never a dearth of material.
you'll get a little view of the Chrysler building as we cross.
Yeah.
The best building in Manhattan, I
You're sure I don't wanna live anymore. I just feel
think. You know, the weird thing is, tomorrow obviously is the 3rd anniversary of September 11th. And this is the exact weather of that day 3 years ago. It was just like this.
come back to December.
It's gonna be there some kind of commemoration or something.
I don't think particularly, although I noticed the other night they had the Towers of Light sculpture thing up, you know, where they direct these lights.
So, this is your favorite bookstore in New York?
The best bookstore in New York, yep. That's my theory. I always, when I buy books, I buy them here. What else could I be? I guess to be an American writer means that I've dined multiply at drive-through windows, and that I have no choice but to occasionally darken the inside of a shopping mall, and that I come from a country of former slave owners, and that I feel the Manhattan Project as a blot on my conscience that I will never expiate, and that there is something in baseball that I think is close to my heart. And it means that I daily have contact with guys who think that our government exists in order to hinder the magnanimous philanthropic work of large corporations. And it means that there's constant vacillation in my head between the ethical messages of Judeo-Christianity and a desire to cast off these messages entirely. And it means that I like artificial cheese food products, and it means that I conceive of nature as an expansive space. And it means that I believe that spirituality is best experienced in landscapes emptied of human beings. And it means that I like to spin the dial on the television set, just can't stop myself from spinning that dial. And it means that I only speak one language well, and it means that I don't mind listening to people on the street talking incessantly about stock prices. And it means that I look to Europe for a definition of the high arts. And it means that sometimes I can't tell the difference between high and low arts. And it means that the sentimental reiteration of family as the origin of all good is never far from my mind, even though I resist this idea entirely. And it means I know a lot about cars, and it means I can talk for half an hour on the best kind of computer. And it means that I have a lot of opinions about the best operating system for a computer. And it means that I prefer music with guitars to music with electronic keyboards. And it means that I think ketchup is a vegetable. And it means that I am, to some degree or other, worried about my weight. And it means I believe strongly in mini storage and the mini storage way of life. And it means I can't imagine anyone would disagree with all these American things. Guess it means a lot of things. Huh.
I don't think of writing as being therapeutic in the sense that I just want to cough up experience and then I feel better afterwards, But I do find that writing about things that have happened is an ordering experience. In other words, I begin to understand it better because the time that it takes to write about something requires insight and reflection and analysis and interpretation, So I started writing about my sister's death because I didn't know what else to do. And I was in this period a couple months after it happened when I couldn't do anything. And I certainly couldn't write about anything else. So I just figured I'm gonna write about this, and I have no idea if it's a story. I don't even care if it's a story, but I can start to understand this experience or think about this experience better in a more kind of rational way. I mean, the story Demonology I've read aloud twice, I think, maybe 3 times. And, not to be sentimental about it, but it's a very hard story to read without crying. And I don't like crying in public, so I don't read it, or have not read it. And I think I read it when I first wrote it, and I read it on the last day of the Demonology tour, just as a marker for myself that I had done the tour and I had written this book, and it should be read once so people know what it's about. But the books aren't for me anymore. Once they're in covers and they're out there in the world, they're for readers. So what's my relationship to the work now? I don't have one exactly. It's not a requirement for me that I pay attention to this work now. It's a requirement for me that I pay attention to the next stuff that has yet to be written. And audiences can do with the work what they will and make of it what they want, It's that freedom of interpretation for them that I'm most excited by. So it's not important what I think or what relationship I have to it.
So what is it like to be a Mets fan?
Well, it's important, I think, as a writer, to have a really complicated kind of fan experience. Like, some people would like the Yankees, but they win all the time. The Mets, it's not a winning proposition necessarily. You really have to believe in, you have to hope against hope to be a Mets fan. And we have the uglier stadium. Everything's worse for Met fans. But that doesn't stop me. I've liked them since I was a kid. I love coming out here. There's something great about the stadium. And it's always exciting, even if it's a bad game, just being a part of it. So, I come out here several times a year. A lot of writers I know like the Mets. Paul Auster likes the Mets. They're sort of connected to the Brooklyn Dodgers and the kind of great period of baseball in New York City. So it's just a great New York experience, really.
And also you said that among you writers, you always talk about baseball.
Yeah. Jonathan Lethem, for example, he's a guy who could talk about baseball. Yo, what do you think? Yeah, you should definitely have one. I think you want blue. Blue is the right color, yeah.
Only $5.
We'll get 2, actually. I'll get the orange, and you get the blue, okay?
All right, excellent.
It's no special discount for 2?
is the losing
okay.
price. Is the
It's the Mets are losing
yes,
price.
it's like
Yeah, okay.
It's the Mets.
it's the
It's
one,
like
it's the
11
one out
and
of season price.
It's like Yankees
Hey,
cap will cost double.
Yankees $10 for one.
Right, exactly.
Have a good day. Enjoy the
All
game.
right, take care.
You
man.
too.
See ya.
Bye. How's it?
That looks good on you.
Want it?
All right, let's see.
Okay, so
All
let's
right,
go
in we go.
see the game. Who's playing tonight?
The Phillies, Philadelphia.
Are they good?
They're better than the Mets, but that's
Well,
not
that's
saying much. They're in third place, I think.
And the Mets are last.
Second to
Already.
last. Very close to being in last.
And there were others caught in the vine of those 5 minutes of June in front of the cop shop on 8th Street in the moments just before and after. Buck Miller and Susan Ward and a guy whom I used to see at the Marlin Cafe, and Debbie the girl who drove Doris to the airport who also knew Yvonne, and Ray the guy who hosed down the booths in Peep World, and Crystal the preoperative transsexual who slept with Jorge one night and then stole all of his stuff. And the auctioneer at Wendy's, and the woman Huck with the dildo that glowed violet neon, and the guy getting fisted by 2 men at once, and Randy's friend Noel, and the men who had fucked Marlena when she was a hooker, most of whom didn't know she was dead, and the 2 guys in the band with no name, and some people I know whom I have not mentioned yet, like Robert and David and Frank from the Mud Club, and Dan and Crutch and Bob, Julia, Karen, Kenny and Kate, Lizzie, and there are other names I don't know yet, and myself, me, I was there. All of us strode up and down 8th Street like it was an actual artery in some larger life form, in some larger organism. As one of our numbers slipped into a storefront along 8th Street, another passed by. None of us seemed to know the nature of the coincidences that bound us together, as I know now, or that junkies and masochists and hookers and those who have squandered everything are the ring of brightest angels around heaven. And just by chance, a bunch of these characters turned up in Yvonne's documentary, which had been transferred to film and then back to videotape, and which now languished in a footlocker. Each of them was captured in and around the bars that Yvonne frequented when she was just out of school. I remember what she looked like then, when her face had an openness like good luck, like the big puffy clouds you see over the desert. I remember how bright her eyes were. I remember how excited she got by stuff, how a movie at the Film Forum could change her for weeks, how a certain record with just the right snare drum sound and a little bit of anger could keep her going all night writing. And the end of the film, the end of it for now until somebody completes it for Yvonne, was like this. At a party crowded with the characters in this story, or other characters not unlike these. At a party at the Ruin weeks before its closing, with stalls strung with Christmas lights, surrounded by half-clothed erotic dancers, the band with no name struck up some kind of evolved march thing. In the basement of this wretched club, the music was fast, everyone knew the song, the room was lit poorly. You could have slept with anyone in the room. You could have thrown your arms around anyone and it would have been okay. It would have been nice. The frame was frozen for a second. Then there was a jump cut and the band was throwing down its instruments and there was some buzz and a Fender Twin reverb amp, a little feedback. But the guys in the band weren't paying any attention to it. And there was a close-up on Randy laughing, his smile taking up the whole screen, and then it just ends. I am going now. I am leaving.